Okay, so for the next part of the video, let's look at some try except problems. So in the first one here, our code is asking the user to input their age, and the instructions say to use numerals only. But of course, as we know, the user may not do what we tell them. So we're going to look at what happens if they enter these two inputs. So let's go ahead and assume that the user enters 40 FORTY for the first time we run this. So we're going to run this try block until we get to an error. So the first thing that's going to happen is it's going to print in 10 years you will be, and this optional end argument here is what will be printed at the end after this part. So if you guys recall from earlier in the class, if you change the end argument, if you set it yourself, then each print command will not come out on a different line because the normally default value for end is a line break. So you can prevent it from printing on the next line by changing this end argument to something else. Okay, so what's going to print here? Let's go ahead when 40 is entered. So I'll do them one by one. So things that print when 40 is entered, the first thing is this part that's going to print. And then instead of a line break, oops, put in a comment, the end string here, the space comes at the end. And then potentially we print something else on the same line after that. Okay, the next thing that happens is age is changed to an integer, but we know we're going to get an error from this part, right? Because the user entered 40. So at that point, we get an error. So we skip over the rest of the code in the try block. So we do not do this line 5. We go down to the except block and we do whatever it says down here. And it says to print a person who still can't follow directions. So the things that print when 40 is entered is in 10 years, you will be a person who still can't follow directions. So we're insulting the user for entering their age without numerals. So let's go ahead and we can just run this and confirm that is what we get. Yep. Okay, so by changing that end argument there, it makes these two print commands to come out on the same line, basically. All right, so let's do this again when the user does follow the directions and they enter their age with numerals. So I'll make this 40. Okay, so again, oh, and by the way, I think I mentioned this on a test before maybe, but I don't consider the question itself as like part of the content that gets printed, since it doesn't come with a print command. Although technically, I guess, I mean, the user does see this text here, so I guess like I wouldn't be appalled or like count it wrong if you had included this part, the enter your age, you use numerals only part. It wasn't my intention that that be part of the answer, but I would understand if you interpreted the question that way and included that. I was thinking just only things that were printed with the print command. Okay, so anyway, let's assume they entered the numerals 40 this time. So we're still going to go to the try block and try to do everything. So we're going to print this phrase in 10 years you will be, and then the space at the end, and then space. And then now we're going to try to convert what they entered to an integer, so that will work. It'll convert to 40 and as an integer. And then we're going to print 40 plus 10, which will be 50. And so it's going to come out on the same line, 50. All right, and that's it. So because there's no error, we skip over the except block. And we can just go ahead and run this and confirm. In 10 years, you will be 50. Yep. Okay, so let's look at the next one. So now we have lists, so it looks like we could possibly get some errors from indexing to places that don't exist or that sort of thing. I'm trying to call indexes that don't exist. So we have a list called ranks, first, second, third, fourth, fifth. And we have a list called winning order, said Anna, Ava, Deb, and B. So it looks like maybe these are the people who won first, second, third, fourth, and fifth. And then we have a prompt to enter your name. So the user is going to enter their name. And then we're going to try, so let's go ahead and try doing it for when Faye is entered. So I'll make a list down here of things that print when Faye is entered. Okay, so we're going to try doing this command here, I equals winning order dot index name. So dot index is how you find the index of an entry in a list if you want the number of the index. So if they enter Faye, Faye is not in this winning order list. So when Python goes to look for the index of Fay in this list, is not going to find it, and that is actually going to raise an error. I believe, I can't remember if it's a value error or if it's an index error. I think it's an index error. But anyway, so we are going to get an error at this point, which means we're going to skip over the next two lines, the rest of the try block, and we're going to go right down to the print block, or sorry, to the accept block, and we're going to do this print command. So it's going to print you did not place. Okay, which makes sense because it looks like Fay did not place. So that's what happens when we enter Fay. Now let's say we enter Anna for the second part. So things that print when Anna is entered. Okay. So when we enter Anna up here for name, Python is going to go to the winning order list and it's going to look for the index of Anna. Okay, and here is Anna in winning order. And so that index is 1. So I is going to become 1. Okay, so I is going to be 1. And then we're going to go to the ranks list and we're going to look for index I. So here's ranks, and index 1 is the string second. And so that's going to be assigned to be stored under the variable R. Okay, and then we're going to print U1 and then R, which will be second, and then place. Okay, so this is going to print U1 second, and then for some reason I capitalized things wrong. So the place is capitalized, but second is not. And that's it. There's no error, so we skip over the accept block. Just double check what happens when we enter Fay. Yep, you not place. When we enter Anna, you won second place. Okay, so the next one, the last one, we ask the user to enter a real number, which I guess means they could put decimals, negatives, things like that. And let's go ahead and for the first one, when they enter 2, let's write down what prints. Things that print when 2 is entered. Okay, so the first thing is we're going to try the accept block. We're going to print the reciprocal of, and then we're going to print num. So the value of num is going to be whatever they entered up here. So that'll be 2. So we're going to print the reciprocal of, and then because we're putting a comma here, by default there's a space when we come to the next thing after the comma. So then we're going to put the value of num, which is 2. And then for the end, we're going to put a space, and that means that we're going to put a space here, and the next print command is going to come on the same line. Okay, because we replaced the optional end argument, which is usually line break by default. Okay, now we're going to turn num into a float if possible. So when num is 2, that will work. We can turn it into a float. Basically, if it looks like a float, it should be able to be turned into a float. So we're not going to get an error from that. In fact, none of these are going to give us an error when we turn them into a float. They're all fine. So that'll go fine. And then we're going to print is. Okay, and then another space because of this comma. And then we're going to divide 1 divided by 2. And that Python, by default, when you divide one number by another, the answer will come out as a float. So 1 over 2 as a float is going to be 0.5. Okay, and it is going to automatically round to wherever, like it's not going to put extra zeros after it. It'll just round it up to 0.5 like that. So you can go ahead and check this and make sure. Okay, so reciprocal of 2 is 0.5. All right, since there were no errors, we don't do this accept block. Okay, so let us try the next entry. So 0.25. So when 0.25 is entered, okay, so num is going to be 0.25. We're going to print, again, the reciprocal of, and then we're going to print 0.25. And then we're going to print the ending string, which is a space. Okay, and the next print's going to go on the same line. So num will convert to a float just fine. It looks like a float. It'll go fine. And then we're going to print is. And then we're going to try to do 1 over 0.25, which is going to be 4. It is going to come out as a float, so it'll be 4.0. That's just by default. Anything divided in Python will come out as a float. And I don't see any errors that are going to happen, so that should be it. Let's double check. 0.25. Yep. All right, and then the last one. So things that print when 0 is entered. I think I already see what's going to go wrong here. So we'll try to carry out these commands here. So the first one is the reciprocal of, we print that. And then there's a space because of this comma. And then we print the value of num, which is 0. And then the ending string, which is a space. Okay, we try to convert 0 to a float. That's fine. It looks like a float. It'll become a float. But the real problem is here when we try to do 1 over 0. So when you try to do 1 over 0, that doesn't, Python can't do that any better than your calculator can. So we are going to get an error. And there won't be anything printed from this. So if there was any error on this line, then none of that will get printed out. Okay, so we're going to skip over that print command. We're going to come down here and we're going to do the except block and we're going to print does not exist. So it does actually come out grammatically. We don't have like an extra word is right here. It just does not exist. Right, we can go ahead and run that, double check. Yeah, reciprocal of 0 does not exist. So there's not like a partially printed part from here. The entire line here gets evaluated for printing for any errors before any of it gets printed. Okay, so that is it for this section.